I'm really happy to announce a brand new product that we are making in-house. Introducing Man Cleaner from Coyle Tools, the mechanic scrubbing soap. This is a very gritty soap that'll exfoliate your skin, knock out your calluses and your rough spots, and dig deep to get all the grease and the grime and the dirt that can collect on your skin after a long day of work in a shop. This one contains a lot of pumice, so it's great for doing all the heavy-duty cleaning that a regular soap won't tackle. So don't use this on your junk because you'll be in for a surprise. Instead, we have a second product called Parts Cleaner that's a bath and body bar that's made for use all over. So I thought a really great video would be to show you the whole process of what it takes to make Man Cleaner and Parts Cleaner. So let's go into my kitchen where I've got a new batch underway. This is my measuring station, and I'll show you all the ingredients and the equipment that we'll be using here. Coconut oil, castor oil, pumice, mica colorant, distilled water, and lye. That's it for the ingredients. For the equipment, we have measuring cups for the coconut oil, lye, and water, measuring cups for the castor oil and the pumice, a large Pyrex measuring cup, a stainless steel pot, some PPE for handling the lye, safety glasses, and gloves, and a scale that measures in grams. And I have my recipe sheet right there. I always have a towel at each station because something's going to drip or spill and I want to clean it up quickly. And we have the lye station, which is really my stove top. The reason I'm using it is not because I'm going to be using the stove, but because I'm going to be venting the fumes that are created when you mix lye and water through my vent hood. This is going to be my mixing station where I have a stick blender, another towel to clean up any spills, and there's room here to work with the Pyrex measuring cup and the stainless steel pot. I have a pouring station, which is going to include my molds. This is a small loaf mold that I'm going to use because there's a little bit that's going to be left over that I can make one additional bar out of. This is a slab mold. I've portioned it off using some trimmed old soaps and an acrylic barrier. And I do this because I want the slab to be one particular size, but I can't get a silicone mold at that correct size. So what I've done is portion it off so I get exactly 12 cut pieces out of this, and there's some leftover batter that I'm got an additional 13th piece out of by using this loaf mold. And there's still going to be some left over, and I just make these smaller bars to use personally. And then everything else gets packaged up. You have to have a thermometer to measure the temperature of your lye water and your oil. I'll be using the microwave oven to get the oil to its proper temperature. All right, let's start measuring first. I measure the water and the lye because when you mix the two, it gets very hot, over 190 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's kind of neat because it happens instantly. So what I do is start this process first, put this off to the side under my vent hood there. So in goes the water first, and then after I measure the lye, I pour that in. And while that's all hot, I start working on other things because I need the lye water to come down to a temperature between 115 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit. In goes the lye. You have to be careful of any splashes or granules that come up. That's why I'm wearing gloves and glasses. And then you start to stir. Once you do that, this thing gets hot instantly. I try to show on camera the steam coming off of the water. You can't see it, unfortunately, but it's there. And after I stir it for a minute or so, I just want to make sure that all the granules dissolve properly. And once they do, the caustic nature of the lye itself has been neutralized and it's no longer harmful. And I'll be honest with you too that I have never smelled any vapors, even though it's under my vent hood. I've tried to, waft it over to me a couple of times to kind of test it and see what it smells like, which is probably not the most advisable thing, but I've never smelled anything, so I don't know how dangerous the fumes are. I'm just taking it on the words of advice that I got from other people who make soap. They say not to breathe it in, so I don't. So I don't want to test it too much. So that's cooling down. Now we can measure the rest of the ingredients. The castor oil goes in next. And I set this aside because I'm going to combine this later on with the coconut oil. And now I measure out the coarse pumice, which makes this the scrubbing soap. The only difference between man cleaner and parts cleaner is the pumice. The recipe is exactly the same for both bars. So the only thing I don't do when I make the parts cleaner soap is I just don't add the pumice. Together, the coconut oil and the castor oil make a fantastic lather. The castor oil gives you some moisturizing qualities to the soap. So the only difference is the man cleaner has pumice and the parts cleaner doesn't. Here's a 5-gallon bucket of coconut oil, and I just go in there with a thick metal spatula, scoop it out, and start dropping it on the scale. And I don't have a measuring cup that's large enough to get it all in one measured batch, so I just break it up in 2 batches. So, and as it is, each one barely fits in there. The good news is that coconut oil is really soft, even in its solid state like this. It's solid at room temperature, but it melts at 76 degrees. So sometimes if I'm in the mood, I'll just leave the bucket out in the sun for a little while and it turns to liquid. But I found that it's easier to handle it in its solid form because it's less messy. 1 measuring cup full at a time. I put this into the Pyrex measuring cup because I'm going to have to heat this up to get it into its liquid state and to make sure that it also reaches a working temperature of 115 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And there's a second measured portion. In that goes, I just mash it down to make sure it fits inside my microwave because I don't have a large microwave oven. And I want to get every bit that I can because I took the time to measure it. I want to make sure I don't lose too much in the process of transferring it from one container to the other. So I pop it in the microwave for a couple of minutes to soften it up. It's going to be about half melted now. Stir it up a little bit to work it around and then pop it back in where it's going to melt all the way and get it up to temperature. Different soap processes require different temperatures of your oil and your lye water. Some people who make soaps combine those two in 80 to 90 degrees. Some people combine them when they're hotter. Based on how I make the soap and what happens to it after I pour it in the molds, 115 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit is good. So here the oil's at around 117 degrees, which is fine, because I'm just going to put this aside, and when I look now at the lye water, I see that it's about 118 degrees, 119 degrees. And when I combine the two, everything's going to be right in my target temperature. So I pour the oil into the lye water, and here's where timing is important. This is where your chemical reaction starts, which starts to turn this into soap. And this process is called saponification. In goes the coconut oil. Now I'm putting in the castor oil. And the trick here is to combine these by making an emulsion. I'm going to put the colorant in now, which doesn't really affect anything regarding the interaction of the oil to the lye water. But you have to make an emulsion out of this, which means you have to combine two things that don't normally coexist easily, and that's water and oil. But you can do it as long as you follow the right techniques. And I put a stick blender in here to blend it up. Now this is going to combine the water and the oil into an emulsion, which will maintain that combined state for an indefinite period of time. Same thing as using cooking, if you're familiar at all with making things like hollandaise sauces or béarnaise sauces, even mayonnaise, that's an emulsion when you're combining oils and waters. Although they don't mix molecularly because they're too different, they can exist in a state where they're combined so that you can use them for its intended purpose. And you can see it's starting to get thicker. And I scrape off the dome on the blender to show you. And this process can happen surprisingly quick if you're combining the right ingredients. Some people use fragrance oils, and fragrance oils will accelerate this whole process. And this process of saponification brings you to what's called trace, and that's how thick your soap batter gets. I don't go for a heavy trace on this. I go for a fairly medium trace, enough to keep the pumice that I just added suspended in the batter. So I'll do this for another couple of minutes, make sure everything's combined really well, achieve an emulsion, and to bring it to a medium trace. And there you can see how it's thicker than it was just a moment ago. And once it's ready, the clock's ticking, because this will start to cure right away. And if you wait too long, then you can have a gloppy mess on your hands and this can start to solidify. So you want to make sure that as soon as you've achieved the desired trace, you then do your pour. Take it over to the pouring station where I have my mold ready. And it's a simple matter of just dumping it in. There, you can get really artsy with making soaps, and when you do, the art of the pour really matters to your desired result. Here, we're just making real utilitarian soap, so I'm not doing anything too swanky with it. I just pour the batter in until it reaches the top of the form that I made in the mold there. And that's really all there is to it. It's a very simple process. And if I wanted to get snazzy, it gets way more complicated, but there's no reason to. It just sits there and now the curing starts. And the cool thing about the curing process is it lets off heat while it's doing it. So in another hour or so, it's going to get pretty hot. You can see there I poured the rest of the batter in the other molds. And we're going to come back in 24 hours and I'll show you what it looks like. The next day, the soap is cured enough for me to remove it from the mold and cut it. I'm going to mark the sides of the mold here with a knife so that I make sure that I cut it in the right direction, because that's not a square slab. It's rectangular, and I don't want to make the mistake of cutting it along the wrong dimension. If I do that, I'll have 3 bars of soap that are too short. Ask me how I know. So I'm not going to do that again. It's easy enough to release the soap from the silicone mold. It just pops right out, and it has a surprising amount of strength to it, the slab does, so it's difficult to break it. I was nervous when I first did this to think that, well, maybe it hasn't cured enough, or it doesn't have the strength to remove it from the mold, but it does. And then it's just a matter of popping off the forms that I used, which is easy enough. And you can see the texture on the top there. It kind of looks like a lunar surface. That's just how it looks after it cures, and that doesn't go away. You'll see some artisan soaps, well, they'll plane that down to make it smooth, but honestly, I really don't care that much. It's not a big deal to me to have a texture like that on a soap that is really supposed to be a utilitarian bar of soap. It's not like I'm going to be entering it in contests or selling it as an artisan soap somewhere, which a lot of people do, and they take great care to make sure that the surfaces and finish of the soap bars they make are way better than these. But for my purposes, I don't mind having a bar of soap that looks like it's a handmade bar of soap. Here I'm cutting each piece to length, and I have to go in about 1/2 inch first to make a relief cut. And then I back the slab out and spin it around to cut the rest of the way. The reason I make that relief cut is because if I didn't, and I just started and sent the slab through the cutter like this, then at the very end, the wire from the cutter would push against the back of the slab and it will chunk off a small piece. So to avoid that, I just make that relief cut first, and then I have the first cut along this dimension. This is a specialty soap cutter that I use for this. We've tried using knives, we've tried using different styles of cutters, and it's funny in making soap how what you have available to you commercially will often dictate how you make this soap. For example, we originally started making soap in loaf molds, but we didn't have a cutter that could cut a loaf mold the way we wanted. So we decided to get this kind of cutter, and in so doing we realized a slab would be the best way to pour the soap. So the cutter dictated how we make our pour. And when we looked to figure out the size of the bars we needed to cut, what dictated that was the size of the soap boxes that we had available to us. So one thing dictated another, and regardless of what size we wanted to make the soap, we were constricted by the size of the boxes, and regardless of how we may have wanted to cut the soap, we were constricted by the kind of cutters that were available. All in all, I think that our solution is a very good one, but we had to take into account more than I thought we did when we first started. And when I'm cutting them to length here, I just have marked on the bottom of the cutter a black line and marker that I just line up the soap pieces with and make the cut, and they all come out perfect every time. Now that the pieces are cut, I want to dress it up a little bit, remove the little fuzzy pieces that collect along the edge from the cutter, and I do that with a vegetable peeler, and I just chamfer the edges of the bar, and then I chamfer the corners. And I'll also dress up the side a little bit there. Sometimes the cutter can leave a little bit of a jag in the side, but that's easy to clean up. Just a couple of passes with the vegetable peeler, and you get nice chamfered edges and corners. I admire the work that artisans can do making some spectacular looking soap. When I looked on YouTube, I found there were surprisingly few soap makers who made soap that you wouldn't feel guilty using to actually clean your hands with. There's a few people out there that do it, but mostly what I found are true artists who take this to a whole other level. With me, I just wanted to make something that had some commercial value that I could sell, keep the price down, and give somebody what I thought was a superior bar of scrubbing soap over anything else that they could get commercially. When we tested this against other commercial brands, we looked at Lava, we looked at some other bars of soap, and lots of things that we didn't like about some other brands. So we decided this gives us an opportunity to make this exactly how I think it should be, based on not only customer feedback in our test groups, but also comparing it to other commercial offerings. And I really do think that we came up with a better formulation. After they've all been dressed up, I just stick them here in this box, and they'll cure for another few weeks. After they're done curing, We just put them in their little soap boxes, load them up on the truck, and watch them sell. So far, sales have been very good, and I'm really happy about how well these have been doing, and I get some very good positive feedback on it, which is important because it lets us know if we're missing the mark somewhere or if we need to make any improvements. I hope this is interesting to you. It's a different kind of video than what we normally do on the channel, but because this is now an integral part of the business, I wanted to share it with you. And if you'd like to see more about soap making, there are so many YouTube videos that spotlight all kinds of artistic approaches to soap making, although we're a little more kind of utilitarian than a lot of those soap makers are. There's some really cool things that you can see, and maybe you'd like to get into making some soaps yourself. There is a market for really good artisan soaps out there, so have at it. It's a cool hobby. In the meantime, we've turned it into a pretty decent additional product line for us. All the stuff that we've made so far has sold out. So the batches that you saw me making today will go on the truck as soon as they're cured and ready to go. So do me a favor and keep watching the channel because we've got all kinds of cool stuff coming down the line, including updates on the business, where we've expanded into our nitrile disposable glove line, our soap line. We're going to be doing air tool repair videos, and of course, our tools in the haul videos, which are a regular staple on this channel. So do me a favor and click down here now to subscribe so that you don't miss any of it. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, use a tool. Don't be one.